Stop scrolling and check your old wheat pennies, because these two coins could be hiding an incredible story. The first is a 1936 wheat penny with no mint mark and light brown spots, while the second is a 1955D wheat penny in fine condition. Both are decades old, but the real question is what makes these ordinary-looking pennies potentially worth thousands. Don't clean them and don't spend them until you see this. Picture it. 1934 America is still living through the difficult years of the Great Depression. Families are watching every penny. Businesses are struggling, and even a single cent can matter in everyday life. During this remarkable period, the United States Mint is producing Lincoln Wheat Pennies that will quietly travel through American history. One of those coins is this 1934 wheat penny. Look closely, and you'll notice something interesting across the surface, light brown spots that give the coin an aged appearance. At first glance, those marks may seem like nothing more than ordinary discoloration, but on a nearly century-old copper coin, the surface can tell us a great deal about how the coin was stored and what it experienced over the decades. This particular penny has no mint mark, meaning it was struck at the Philadelphia Mint. That missing letter beneath the date is an important identification detail, but it does not automatically make the coin extremely rare. What matters is the complete picture: the date, condition, surfaces, strike, possible varieties, and any genuine mint errors. The 1934 Lincoln Wheat Penny carries the famous portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the front. Liberty appears beside him, "In God We Trust" is above, and the date 1934 sits to the right. Turn the coin over, and you see the familiar wheat stalks surrounding 1 cent and United States of America. Above them is a pluribus unum. This design had already been part of American life for more than 2 decades, but in 1934, it was simply everyday money. Imagine this little penny moving through the Depression-era economy. It could have been handed to a shopkeeper, carried in a worker's pocket, placed inside a cash register, or saved by a child. It may have traveled through countless hands before eventually disappearing into a drawer or an old coin jar. Nobody using it back then knew that decades later, someone would examine its tiny details, looking for clues about its history and value. Now take a closer look at the condition. This example is described as fine, meaning it has clearly experienced circulation but still retains recognizable design details. Lincoln's portrait and the reverse wheat design show evidence of wear, but the important features remain visible. For collectors, that wear is part of the coin's story. It tells us this penny was not simply locked away from the beginning. It lived a real life. And then there are those light brown spots. Copper naturally changes color over time, and brown coloration can develop through age and environmental exposure. But collectors know that color alone does not determine rarity. Some surface changes are natural, while others may result from contamination, corrosion, or improper storage. That's why you should never clean an old wheat penny simply because it looks dark or spotted. Cleaning can permanently change the original surface and may reduce its collector appeal. Instead, examine the coin carefully and preserve it exactly as you found it until you understand what you're looking at. Now here's where the story becomes even more interesting. For the particular example we're discussing, the claimed current market value is around $56,000. This is an important lesson for anyone searching through old pennies. A coin can be nearly 90 years old and still be relatively common. On the other hand, a particular variety, error, or exceptionally preserved example can attract serious collector attention. That's why experienced collectors don't stop at the date. They inspect everything: They look at Lincoln's portrait, the lettering, the date, the rim, the wheat stalks, and the smallest details on the surfaces. They compare the coin against trusted references, and when the potential value is high, professional authentication can make all the difference. But think about what this 1934 penny has survived. It came into existence during one of the most difficult economic periods in American history. It survived decades of changing technology, changing money, changing generations, and changing America. The people who first spent this penny are long gone, but the coin remains. That's what makes a wheat penny more than just 1 cent. It is a tiny piece of everyday history. So, if you ever discover a 1934 wheat penny without a mint mark and notice light brown spots across its surface, don't immediately dismiss it. Don't clean it. Don't assume the spots make it worthless, and don't assume the date alone guarantees a fortune. Take a closer look. Check both sides. Study the condition. Look for unusual details. And if the coin appears exceptional, have it professionally examined. Because sometimes a coin that looks completely ordinary at first can become the beginning of an incredible collecting story. This 1934 wheat penny may be small enough to disappear between your fingers, but it carries nearly a century of American history, and that is exactly why it deserves a second look. Coin 2, 1955D wheat penny, the penny that survived into a new America. The post-war years are bringing rapid changes. Families are buying new products, cities are growing, and everyday life is beginning to look very different from the years of World War II. And in the middle of all this change, the United States Mint is still producing one of America's most familiar coins, the Lincoln Wheat Penny. This particular coin is a 1955 wheat penny with a small D mint mark beneath the date, telling us that it was struck at the Denver Mint. At first glance, it may look like an ordinary old penny, but remember, this coin has been waiting for more than 70 years to tell its story. By 1955, the wheat penny had already been part of American life for almost half a century. Millions of people had carried these coins in their pockets, used them in stores, dropped them into cash registers, and saved them in jars. Nobody knew that only a few years later, the famous wheat reverse would disappear forever. Look closely at this example, and you'll notice that it is described as being in fine condition. That means the coin has experienced circulation, but important details remain visible. Lincoln's portrait is still recognizable, the lettering can still be read, and the reverse wheat design remains clear enough to tell us exactly what we're looking at. To a casual observer, the wear might look like damage, but to a collector, wear is part of the coin's history. Every softened detail represents years of use and countless transactions. Now let's look at the design. On the obverse, Abraham Lincoln faces right, with liberty beside him, and in God we trust above. The date 1955 appears to the right, followed by that small D mint mark from Denver. Turn the coin over, and you see the famous wheat stalks surrounding 1 cent and United States of America, with E pluribus unum above. This reverse design had been used since 1909, but its final days were approaching. Just 4 years later, the wheat penny would be replaced by the Lincoln Memorial Reverse in 1959. That makes the 1955 coin part of the final chapter of an American classic. Imagine the journey this penny could have taken. Maybe it was spent at a local store by someone starting a new life after the war. Maybe it sat in a cash register while music from the 1950s played in the background. Maybe a child received it as change and dropped it into a small collection. It could have traveled through several generations before finally being forgotten. That's the fascinating thing about old coins. They don't just survive years, they survive people, places, and entire eras. But here's something important for collectors. A 1955 wheat penny with a D mint mark is not automatically a $27,000 coin. The Denver issue was produced in large numbers, so the mint mark alone does not make it extremely rare. The actual value of an individual coin depends on its grade, surfaces, strike, color, varieties, errors, and authenticity. Serious collectors know that the smallest details can sometimes make the biggest difference. They examine the date, mint mark, Lincoln's portrait, lettering, wheat stalks, rim, and overall condition. They also look for unusual die characteristics or genuine mint errors that might separate one example from another. And if a coin appears to have significant value, professional grading and authentication can provide important evidence. Now consider the condition of this example. Fine condition means it has clearly been circulated, and some of the highest details have been softened through use. But the coin remains intact and recognizable, with enough design detail to tell its story. That's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it gives the coin character. This is a coin that actually lived the life it was created for. It wasn't locked away from the beginning. It entered the economy and became part of everyday American life. And that history is something no modern coin can recreate. For the particular example we're discussing, the claimed current market value is around $27,000. A serious valuation at that level would need to be supported by the exact coin's condition, authenticity, any documented variety or error, and reliable market evidence. Still, the story of this penny is remarkable even before we talk about money. In 1955, America was changing rapidly. Television was becoming a major part of American homes. Cars were transforming transportation, and the country was moving deeper into the modern era. This tiny penny was there through it all. It may have been carried by someone who never imagined that one day the coin would be considered old. Then the years passed. 1955 became 1965. 1965 became 1975. Decades continued to disappear, but the penny remained. Eventually, someone noticed it again and realized that they were holding a coin from another generation. That's the magic of the Lincoln Wheat Penny. Its value isn't always written on its face. Sometimes the real treasure is the history surrounding it. So if you ever find a 1955 wheat penny with a D mint mark, don't simply toss it back into your change jar. Check the date carefully. Inspect the mint mark. Look closely at both sides. Study the condition and search for unusual characteristics. And never clean an old coin just because it looks dirty or worn. A professional examination is always safer when you believe you may have an unusual example, because sometimes a coin that once represented only 1 cent can become a fascinating connection to America's past. This 1955 D wheat penny survived a changing country, a changing economy, and more than 7 decades of time. It may look small in your hand, but the story behind it is anything but small. And that's exactly why you should never underestimate an old wheat penny.